I recently did a video on the Empire's attempts to set up their own Jedi academies, focusing on the attempts relatively soon after Endor. But much later on, the Empire had a more successful attempt to start a Force user order. These were called the Imperial Knights, and they're who we're going to be talking about today. The Imperial Knights were an order of light-side Force users which served the Empire as it existed 130 years after the Battle of Yavin, known by then as the Fel Empire under Emperor Roan Fel. Roan Fel and his daughter Marassia, who took over after his own death, were the descendants of Emperor Jagged Fel and his wife Empress Jaina Solo Fel, who had taken control of the Empire originally with Jag as an elected head of state before being declared the new emperor. 2005 and after in Legends gets a little full of Imperial apologia in media, but as far as it's portrayed in-universe at least, Jagged's empire finally did away with even more of the anti-alien policies of the prior empire, allowing aliens to serve as stormtroopers. But while I have a ton of thoughts on the morality and ethics of the Empire even around this point, that's not what we're focusing on today. From his earliest points as leader of the Empire, Jagged was looking for ways to establish a presence of Force users under his command, something that isn't especially surprising given his long-standing partnership turned romance with Jaina Solo, a member of the Jedi Council in the New Jedi Order by the time of the Fate of the Jedi books in about 44 ABY. Jag would have seen just how effective the Jedi could be time and time again, and when you see that and you want stuff done, that seems like a good well to go to. Aside from floating the idea of Jaina helping to establish a Jedi presence in the Imperial Remnant, he also attempted to resurrect an old institution of Emperor Palpatine, the Emperor's Hands, a position originally occupied by individuals like Mara Jade and Merrick Steele, who would serve Palpatine directly. In order to do this, he recruited Tahiri Vela, a former Jedi and Sith apprentice who was unsure of her own path after her redemption from the dark side. This attempt didn't really turn out to be what either of them was really looking for, with Tahiri eventually deciding that the Jedi were the place she belonged after all. Jag joked that Tahiri wasn't cutthroat enough to be an Emperor's hand, and Tahiri joked in response that Jag was too incorruptible to be an Emperor. Unsuccessful though this might have been, it demonstrates the usefulness Jag saw in an order of Force users primarily loyal to himself as Emperor, and while we don't know whether the Imperial Knights as an institution were set up under him or his successor Fel II, it seems likely to me that it's something he and Jaina would have been working on within their own lifetimes, though again, that's my own speculation. The Imperial Knights as an order didn't see themselves as Jedi, but for much of their shared history, the New Jedi Order and Imperial Knights seem to be on relatively cooperative, if not always necessarily friendly terms. Before the release of the Legacy comics themselves, where the Imperial Knights were introduced, there was kind of a guide to the era that was put out. And this guide says that Jedi see the Imperial Knights as, quote, Grey Jedi, but while I can see some of the eye rolls from here already, this isn't really the same as what's typically meant by Grey Jedi, where it's basically a Jedi using the light and dark side, but avoiding the whole I'm evil now thing, because some people think that Force lightning is cool, and they want an excuse to be able to use it on their protagonist characters. In practice, though, the philosophy of the Force held by the Imperial Knights and the Jedi was somewhat similar. The primary loyalty of the Imperial Knights was to the Emperor rather than the Force. But while they saw the Force more as a tool than a thing they should meditate on and understand, they were very strictly supposed to stay within the light side. They were not supposed to tap into the dark side, which is somewhat unsurprising given the influence Jaina Solo definitely had on the group, and given her own knowledge of the dangers of the dark side. Even if she and Jag weren't the ones that set up the Order, if it was her kids, they probably still heard a lot about how bad the dark side was. The head of the Order was the Emperor, with members of the royal family like Emperor Roan Fel, his daughter Marassia, and his cousin Morgan Fel, all being active Imperial Knights. But the biggest caveat of the Knights' service to the Emperor and Empire being their primary goal was that if the Emperor ever fell to the dark side, it was the duty of the Knights to redeem or remove him, not to serve him any longer. Ganner Krieg, one of the Imperial Knights, pointed this out, affirming that their duty was ultimately to the Force after all because of this major tenet. So while the Jedi may have felt the Force being used primarily as a tool to safeguard the Empire was a dangerous way to approach learning about and using the Force, hence the use of Grey in describing the Imperial Knights, The Knights were unquestionably, at least in intent, a light side Force order. There are actually some parallels to how the Jedi served the Republic as a way to serve the Force because they felt that the Republic was how to best maintain order in the galaxy. The Imperial Knights just felt that role was filled by the Empire. So that approach is similar, even if in practice the result is corrupt in a different way and a lot more fascist looking. Things started to get a little messy when the Empire ended up in a war with the Galactic Alliance, a successor state to the New Republic, as essentially part of a new Sith plot, resulting in Darth Krayt taking over the galaxy, because the Empire was still full of Imperials. But the alignment of the Imperial Knights remains uncorrupted when Fel himself speaks out against the war and refuses for either himself or the Imperial Knights as his bodyguards to participate in the conflict directly. It finally seems to fully take over when he assassinates Fel, but it turns out to be a double. In actuality, Fel started working with his Imperial Knights against Darth Krayt. This meant working with the Jedi increasingly often, especially as the Jedi were driven closer and closer to extinction themselves. Several of the younger Jedi students who survived these purges ended up being taken in by the Imperial Knights, including one named Azlyn Rae, who sometimes struggled with her philosophy as a Jedi versus the expectations of the Imperial Knights, especially the expectation that they like this video and subscribe for more as we try to get to 60,000 subscribers. But despite their alleged light side affiliation, the Imperial Knights didn't follow one of the most important Jedi precepts associated with the light side, where they were expected to act to protect the sanctity of all life, because this sometimes came into conflict with their primary duty being to the Empire. This became a sticking point for Master Treyas Sind and the Mon Calamari when Emperor Roan Fel ordered him to leave the Mon Calamari's home planet, which was under threat of an imminent attack from the Sith, because the Mon Calamari were not of the Empire and therefore not his own people. And again, this is an area where I think you can see some similarities or parallels to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon going to Tatooine and not being there to free the slaves as Anakin thinks they might be. Instead, they had almost become these kind of functionaries of the Republic, and this is something that in the text of the prequels, we're kind of supposed to see as a flaw in how the Jedi are operating, but this is something that's even more fundamentally part of the Imperial Knights. Sind, or Sinde, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, ultimately stuck around and did help his friend Tankar of the Mon Calamari, but it does point to some possibilities for darkness to seep in for the Imperial Knights. And much like the Jedi themselves, the Imperial Knights were of course vulnerable to falling to the dark side, as happened once with the former master of a prominent Imperial Knight, Antares Draco. This former Imperial Knight, known as Eshkar Nin, fell to the dark side and became Darth Havoc, one of the servants of Darth Krayt, torturing his one-time apprentice with Force lightning. But the Order as a whole remained much more associated with the Jedi than the Sith. When Marassia Fel suggested cooperation of the Jedi with the Imperial Knights, the two orders formed an alliance to take down Darth Krayt, and ultimately they would become full partners in governing the galaxy, as the new Galactic Alliance, which emerged after Krayt's rule, featured a ruling triumvirate, with a seat for the Jedi, filled at first by Master Kukruk, who had been a Jedi since the days before the Clone Wars, Empress Marassia Fel as the leader of the Empire and therefore also the Imperial Knights, and finally a member of the Galactic Alliance, Admiral Gar Stasi. One might hope this evolved into something a bit more democratic on the Galactic Alliance rep side at least at some point, but if nothing else, it showed enough goodwill between the Jedi and the Knights to be willing to work together. That's going to do it for our overview of the Imperial Knights though, something about which I probably pretty clearly have some mixed feelings. Either way, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments if there's any other topics you'd like to see covered on the channel, and as usual, special thanks to the patrons whose names you're seeing on screen right now. Their support is what makes the channel possible.